go. All right, so people are coming in. Welcome to joining us for our next demonstration session here for the xAPI cohort for fall 2022. We have a treat here, Leaderboard in Rise using xAPI. So this is going to be quite interesting. I'm very interested in this, so we'll see how things go. I know it'll be great looking. I'm gonna
We'll see how interested you remain when it's over.
I think we will, because I like what James and I were talking, or Jim, however you want to be called.
Yeah, Jim's fine.
Jim, okay, because I thought that's what we had, but the cohort itself, there was some number of questions about Rise and using xAPI, and so we're going to get a taste of that here. And I am going to go ahead and turn things over to Jim, and he's going to take us on this journey. And I hope you journey with us and learn something. Make sure you type your questions either in the Q&A or chat. I'll be monitoring both of them and sharing that at the end or in between of some points that Jim is going to cover. We'll look at questions. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Karen. I participated in the fall cohort, and it seemed like there were a lot of questions came up regarding Rise. And this is actually a piece of work that I did some time ago. But I thought, gosh, there were enough questions on Rise that maybe it would be interesting to some people. So we'll go through this. The challenge was to add some gamification, in this case, a leaderboard, to a course developed in Rise. And Rise this is going to require some custom JavaScript, because not only do we have to have a course that writes statements to an LRS, but which is fairly straightforward with Rise, but we have to be able to query that LRS and extract some information to put onto our leaderboard. And we probably all know that Rise doesn't really like to do custom JavaScript on its own, but we can develop an interaction in Storyline and embed it in a Rise course, which is what we're going to go through today. For me, the biggest challenge was how to package the thing at the end. And we'll talk about that, because it involves some things that I found at the time were not well documented. I've used screenshots on slides for most of this stuff for two reasons. One being, it's easier to annotate them that way and help you make sense out of them. And secondly, many of them are slightly redacted to remove some client information or otherwise security type information. So first off, I'd recommend take your Rise course that you've developed a quiz in, export it for API, load it into your test LMS if you've got one, otherwise another LMS, and look at the statements that come out to review them. It's going to make things a lot easier and a lot less frustrating in the long run if you know what statements you're working with when you do your query and what you need to look for. One thing I'll point out here, when you export it for the xAPI LMS, you need to put an identifier in here. This is key because this is going to become the object name in your xAPI statements. And just to give you an idea what was going on, in this case, I was using the Veracity LRS, their free level, and my LMS that I was using was their learner portal that's available through their LRS account. So when we run the course and take our quiz, we get all kinds of statements that it generates. In this case, we got like initialized, launched, attempted for several things, experienced, progressed, answered for a whole bunch of questions in our quiz, passed, and terminated when we exited it. So what we're really interested in is this passed statement, because that's what has our quiz results in it. And here's our passed statement. I put this into 2 columns so we could fit it all on one slide, but just to look at the basic pieces of this, here's our actor, here's our verb, past, here's our object over here, and here's our result. And I'd like to focus on that part of it for just a second. When I've done stuff in Storyline with xAPI and had quizzes, usually I got a quiz block that looked like this, where I had, you know, a score, minimum, maximum, and the minimum was, of course, 0. Maximum was the number of questions in it. The raw, and let's see, can I move this? Yeah, okay. I had my controls blocking that. The raw is the number of questions that were correct, and there's a scaled attribute that is a decimal value from 0 to 1. That's the percentage that were correct. And so in most other queries I've worked with, I worked with the scaled attribute of score. When I looked at what I was getting, you know, kind of by default out of Rise, the statements that it produced, it gave me a minimum of 0, and in my 20 question quiz, it gave me a maximum of 100, which was a %. And in this particular case, where this statement I'm looking at, it gave me a raw score of 95, which, unlike what I was working with in Storyline, was not a number of questions that were correct, but a percentage. So that was a little bit different, and something you might want to keep in mind if you're used to doing this in Storyline. Are there any questions yet at this point, Karen?
I had to turn my mic on, and we don't have any other questions, not right now.
Okay, well, moving right along then. My presentation got locked here for some reason. Maybe it's because I moved my thing. I'm going to stop sharing and start sharing again. Okay. So we created a Storyline file with 1 slide in it. You could probably put more, but there wasn't any real reason here. And you'll notice over in here, we've got a table with some places. And like I said, this only has 5 slots in it. You could make as many as you think you want to use, but this being a proof of concept, it was just a quick illustration. So what's in the name column is Storyline variables that we're going to populate later. And same for the scores, a bunch of Storyline variables. And we have a trigger here that when the timeline starts on this slide, we're going to execute a piece of JavaScript. And what's in that JavaScript? Well, we could have built a whole bunch of statements in here. In this case, we're just going to execute a function that we've defined elsewhere, or we're going to define elsewhere. One of the good reasons to do this is it makes your JavaScript a lot more portable. You can reuse it in a bunch of different courses without having to do a lot of copying and pasting. We're just going to insert the function somewhere, which we'll get to later. So here's what our function looks like at a high level. And this may look scary if you're not used to JavaScript, but we're going to step through this kind of one chunk at a time and talk about what it does. I have worked with JavaScript off and on for about 20 years. I am by no means an expert, and I like to borrow as much of it as I can from wherever I can get it. So I didn't develop this function. This function came from one of Devlin Peck's tutorials. If you're unfamiliar with him or his website, he has a bunch of really great tutorials on how to do different things. So if you're just starting your xAPI journey, I'd really recommend checking out his tutorials. They're free and you'll learn a lot. I certainly did. So the first block of this simply connects to the LRS. And we've got some stuff that I blocked out here because it's all passwords and web addresses. Next, we're going to define the function. And you'll notice these empty parentheses here. That tells JavaScript that it's a function, but it also is a way of passing parameters to create variables within this thing. And if you remember back in the storyline file, when we executed the JavaScript, it had empty parentheses in it too. And I hard coded everything in this function because it was a proof of concept. If I was doing this for real, I would put a parameter in here so that I could pass the object name. So I could reuse the same piece of code in a bunch of different courses and pass it the object I was looking for each time, which would be slightly different. So next, we're going to define the parameters that we're going to look for in our query. And these kind of match up with what we've got in our xAPI statements. So we're looking for a verb, and in our xAPI statement, we had a verb in there. So we've put that same verb name or verb ID in our query parameter. We also have an activity that we're looking for. So we put that activity ID in here, and then we execute this query, which calls a function from the xAPI wrapper. I'll talk a little bit more about talk about that now. The wrapper is something that contains a lot of pre-built functions from ADL, and it's pretty much required for everything you want to do in xAPI, unless you want to do it the hard way. And yeah, then at the end here, we're going to, this constant query data equals thing is what actually runs the query. So the query itself is going to return an array. If you're not familiar with coding, an array is just a collection of different values that have little individual identifiers like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. In the next group, we're going to sort the array that we've got. And all this does, this, function AB and return B dot result score raw to A just means we're going to sort it in order from largest to smallest. So we want the largest score at the top and the smallest score at the bottom. And so the next group sets up a loop. So we're going to increment our little array value from 0 to however many we've got, and increment it one at a time. This is kind of important because you'd think, if you're not a programming geek, that when you get an array of values, you'd have, value 1, value 2, value 3, etc. The way JavaScript works, you're going to have value 0, then value 1, value 2, value 3. So just have to bear that in mind. And in this case, we're dealing with result.score.raw. So, all that means is we're looking for the result block in the xAPI statement, the score kind of sub block, and the raw value within that. And then the purpose of this, what we're doing with this statement value is we're going to append a % character to the end of it to make it look a little more reasonable in our leaderboard. So why did we multiply this by 1? Let me explain that. I just left that there because I'm lazy. Basically, I copied this statement from another function that for one that I had done in Storyline, where I was using the result.score.scaled versus result.score.raw. And the scaled value, as I showed before, is a decimal value. So I was multiplying everything by 100 to get a real integer percentage value out of it. In this case, it was easier just to copy the statement and delete the 2 zeros from the 100. And it kind of reminds me that that's there for a reason once I go back to Storyline. Karen, are there any questions at this point?
Actually, there are no questions. Everyone is
Okay.
just soaking it all in, I think.
Stunned. Okay, the last part of this, we're going to set the Storyline variables that we're going to pass back to our interaction. So it's constant, we set a value for player, where we're going to get the player, which becomes Storyline. And then we're going to set a bunch of variables from variables that we have in our JavaScript routine. And the order of this is kind of important. You see, we're doing like the first user and the first score, second user and second score, third user and third score, and so on. In Devlin's tutorial, he did it kind of the other way, where he set all of the user values first, which were the actor names, and all of the scores after that. So here's an interesting undocumented quirk. As JavaScript is going down executing this, once it finds a null value for one of these things, it's going to stop the whole thing. So if you're just starting out and you don't have a lot of data in your LRS, say like you've only got 2 test recordings, by the time it gets to like third user, it's going to sense a null value, so it's just going to stop and not set anything else. And that means the rest of the leaderboard is going to be blank, which is okay because there are only a few values in there. However, if you set all of the users before setting all of the scores, then it's going to stop when it gets to a null user value, and it never will set any of the score variables. So that was kind of frustrating to figure out, but something that I think is pretty important if you're going to do something like this, because oftentimes, you're going to start testing this with a small amount of data and not be able to populate your whole table. So next up, we need to put this interaction into our RISE course, and RISE can only insert storyline blocks from Review 360. So we need to publish our storyline file with one slide in it to Review 360. And then insert it in our RISE course. So that is in the interact. We create a new block in RISE. It's in the interactive group, and if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you can select a storyline interaction. And doing that, it'll give you a list to choose from of everything you've got in your Review 360 account. Now comes the hard part. We need to add the xAPI wrapper and our function definition to our course. But the question is where to put them. And this is what I found was not really documented very well. If you're used to doing xAPI things like this in Storyline, then this folder and file structure should look fairly familiar, where you've got your published file and you're going to add the xAPI wrapper file and any of your custom JavaScript functions to that, and then edit the story HTML file to add the script tags to insert those JavaScript files. So here's what a published and exported RISE course looks like from a file and folder structure. And we've got index HTML. So it seems logical that you'd want to put the xAPI wrapper in here and edit this index HTML file to insert the script tags. And you can certainly do that, but it's not going to work. So we need to go into the assets folder. And in assets, there's a whole bunch of crazy looking things with dynamically generated names. And in this folder up here, that in this case is KMZL, yada, 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 that's where our storyline interaction is. So if we go into that folder, then we see what we would normally see in published storyline output. So this is where the xAPI wrapper needs to go along with our custom JavaScript function. And we need to edit this story HTML file to put the script tags in to embed the JS files. So then, the last step, we want to reload the published course with the additions into our LMS, and we go through it, and we've got our variables populated with usernames and scores. We have a nice little percent character that we appended to each of the scores. And that's basically it. So let's let that sink in for a couple minutes, and surely somebody has some questions.
I'm actually not seeing any questions right now, so I'm going to give people a couple of seconds here to gather their thoughts and ask any questions that might come to them in terms of, you know, how you could do this. And just give us some feedback as well. I mean, do you normally use JavaScript, or how do you normally use JavaScript, I guess would be. So a question came out. Do you plan to keep working on the proof of concept?
Good question. You know, it's, as I was telling Karen at the beginning of this, or actually before this started, this is not very pretty. You know, it certainly could be dressed up some more. This was a proof of concept for a proposal our company was doing. We ended up not doing that project, but I certainly intend to use this logic again, you know, next time we have an opportunity. And yeah, as I have time, I would consider refining it to make the object name a variable that I'd pass as a parameter, which would make it a lot more versatile.
Well, that's good. So there's a lot of opportunities here where you can take basically the framework here, or the logic you've created, and maybe apply it to some other projects that people are working on.
Mm-hmm.
So keep that in your toolkit there, guys. So, and of course we are recording these, so you can come back and go through this and see how James did this. Are there any other questions, any comments, any other kinds of discussions around this particular project? I'm really not seeing any questions. I'm not seeing any chat coming in. I'm not seeing any Q&A. So I think everyone just took it all in and went, okay, I have to think about this and see how I can do this, and maybe even think about it and play around with it, which is really what the cohort is all about. So I want to thank Jim for sharing his project with us, his proof of concept here, which was great, and how you can utilize this in Storyline. And we are getting, I don't know if you can see that, but we're getting some emojis, some hearts, some thumbs up.
Thanks,
you know,
guys.
so everyone is very appreciative.
I'm going to put my my email address in the chat here. So if you think of any questions later that you wish you had asked, I'll be happy to answer them.
That would be great. Thank you so much for that generosity there, Jim, where if people, as they go through and think about it and go, oh, I have this great question. So there you go. There's his email. And so go ahead and grab that. I'm going to give you a second or two to grab his email, and we will be seeing you at the next session. And in our demonstration here, we're going to be talking with Stephen, and he is going to be sharing with us how to use xAPI to share data between courses. So I'm going to just drop that information in the chat there. That'll be in the demonstration track. You also have that in the email that we sent you. If you're more interested in an educational track for the next session, I'm going to put in chat the next educational track item. It's what to consider when adding xAPI, and that's with Ben Clark and Andy Whitaker. You don't see the email? Let's
Oh
see
yeah,
here.
I apparently sent that to host and panelists.
Oh
So
yeah, yeah.
let's
So
try this again. I'll do it to everyone.
I got it. I
Um,
got it. I didn't
okay,
even notice that. There we go. That should be, there we are. That
okay.
should be everybody. So
Sorry
now
about that.
that's okay. I think I did the same thing because yeah, no, okay. Because you have to switch it. It defaults to hosts and panelists.
Yeah.
So all right, so that email should be there for everybody. Oh, I see a question. Here we go. I've embedded storyline slides in Rise, but haven't used xAPI with them. The storyline slides operate separately as separate embeds. Could you see a similar approach to get the storyline slides to talk to each other using xAPI? Very interesting question.
Well, yeah, that would certainly be possible. Because, in this case, we were using a storyline slide to go out and query and harvest information from statements that were already in our LRS, from previous iterations of the course, or even the current one. Because the way this is done, the quiz ends and writes stuff out before the leaderboard interaction. So we're going to get, the most, all of the results, including the current one, when we do our query. So you could certainly use a storyline interaction to write some custom JavaScript into the LRS and then use a query like this to pull it back later.
Okay, I hope that answers your question. Anything else? Any other questions?
Let me just back up a little bit here and add something to that. Okay, so if you are going to if you're going to include multiple storyline interactions in a RISE course, you're going to end up with one of these dynamically named folders for each interaction. So you may have to, do a little research and figuring out which one. If you're doing xAPI in all of them, you can add the wrapper and all of your functions to each one, and it's only going to help. But that's something you might want to be aware of. That I think it's, I haven't done that myself, but I think it's going to be kind of hard to tell which interaction is which in the published material.
All right. All right, so that makes sense, is what he says. So, okay, great. Anything else, attendees?